Welcome to Sleepy Game Lore. Today we walk a different kind of path, not through kingdoms or battlefields, but through something far more intimate, something quieter, something heavier. This is the story of Senua, a young woman from the northern islands of Orkney, living in the late 8th century, where the world was cold and the gods were cruel. But this is not a story about gods, not really. This is a story about grief, about loss that sits in your chest like a stone you cannot move, about voices that never stop speaking even when you beg them to be quiet, about the desperate, impossible journey we take when someone we love is gone and we cannot accept it. So settle in, get comfortable, let the world outside grow distant. And let me tell you about a woman who walked into the underworld carrying nothing but a sword, a broken heart, and the severed head of the only person who ever truly saw her. This is Hellblade, Senua's Sacrifice. Part 1. The Girl Who Heard Too Much. Before we can walk with Senua into the realm of the dead, we must first understand where she came from. We must go back to the beginning, to a childhood that was never kind, to a world that feared what it could not understand. Senua was born on the Orkney Islands, those windswept fragments of rock that cling to the northern edge of what is now Scotland. In the late 8th century, this was Pictish land, home to a people who painted their bodies with woad and honored the old ways. They lived close to the earth, their lives shaped by the turning of seasons and the whispered will of their gods. Picture those islands as they might have been then, the sky forever gray, the color of wet stone pressing down on a landscape of heath and rock and sudden violent beauty, the sea surrounding everything, cold and dangerous and full of fish that sustained the people through long winters, standing stones from ages past dotting the hills, monuments to beliefs that even the Picts only half remembered. The wind, always the wind, carrying salt and the cries of seabirds, and sometimes, in certain seasons, the distant sound of drums from villages gathering for ceremonies that had been performed since before memory began. It was a hard land that made hard people. Death was never far, whether from sickness or storm, or the countless small accidents that claimed lives with casual indifference. The gods the Picts worshipped were not gentle deities who promised comfort and protection. They were forces of nature as likely to destroy as to bless, requiring constant appeasement through ritual and sacrifice. In such a place, anything unusual was treated with suspicion. Difference was dangerous. Those who did not fit the patterns of ordinary life were either holy or cursed, and the distinction often depended on who was doing the judging. Her father was a man named Zinbel, a druid, a keeper of the old traditions and the old fears. He lived apart from the village proper, isolated in a small homestead with his wife and daughter. Some might have called this arrangement protective, others might have seen it for what it was, a prison dressed in the language of faith. Senua's mother was called Galina. She was gentle, they say, a healer who understood herbs and remedies, who moved through the world with a kind of quiet grace. But Galina carried something within her that the village could not name and her husband could not accept. She heard voices, she saw things that others could not see, patterns in the clouds, faces in the bark of trees, whispers in the wind that told her secrets about people and places and things yet to come. In another time, another place, Galina might have been called a seer, a wise woman, a prophet touched by something greater than ordinary human perception. But in Zinbel's understanding, there was only one explanation for such afflictions. His wife was cursed, touched by darkness, corrupted by forces that threatened not only her soul, but the souls of everyone around her. And when Senua began to show the same symptoms, when she too began to hear the voices that whispered and chattered and never fell silent, Zinbel's fear transformed into something harder, something colder, something that would shape his daughter's entire existence. The darkness, he called it, a curse passed from mother to daughter like a disease of the blood. He believed with the absolute certainty of a man who has never questioned his own understanding of the divine, that this darkness was a punishment from the gods, that it could be driven out through prayer and penance, through isolation and suffering, through rituals that left marks on the body and scars on the soul. We do not know exactly what Zynbel did to his wife and daughter in the name of purification. The game offers only fragments, memories that surface like debris from a shipwreck. But we know enough. We know about the pit. A small, dark space carved into the earth where Senua was kept when her father deemed her too dangerous to be among others. The walls were covered with runes, symbols meant to contain the darkness, to trap it within the narrow confines of that terrible hole. We know about the rituals, the prayers spoken over trembling bodies, the implements of faith that left their marks on flesh. We know that Senua spent years in this cycle of punishment and brief reprieve, learning to fear herself as much as she feared her father. But most devastating of all, we know what happened to Galina. Senua was 5 years old when her father made his final attempt to cure his wife of her affliction. The rituals had failed, the prayers had gone unanswered. In Zynbel's interpretation of divine law, there was only one option remaining: a sacrifice, an offering to the gods that might finally lift the curse from his family. He burned her alive. Little Senua watched as her mother was tied to the stake. She watched as the flames rose, as the screams filled the air, as the woman who had loved her and held her and tried to teach her that her gift was not something to fear was consumed by fire, while the villagers looked on and her father intoned prayers to gods who did not answer. The memory was too terrible to hold, and so Senua's mind did what minds sometimes do when confronted with horror beyond bearing. It rewrote the story. It told her that Galina had taken her own life, that her mother had been unable to bear the burden of the darkness any longer, that the fire had been her choice rather than her murder. This lie became the foundation of Senua's understanding of herself. If her mother had been destroyed by the darkness, then Senua too was doomed. The curse would consume her eventually, just as it had consumed Galina. She was dangerous. She was broken. She was a vessel for something terrible that could not be controlled, and her father made certain she never forgot it. For years after Galina's death, Zynbel kept Senua in near total isolation. She was allowed out only rarely to gather herbs or perform simple tasks that kept her useful without exposing her to others. The rest of her time was spent in the homestead, learning to hate herself, learning to fear the voices that never stopped speaking, learning that she was fundamentally, irreparably wrong. The voices themselves were constant companions, a chorus of speakers who commented on her every action, her every thought, her every breath. Some were cruel, mocking her failures and whispering her deepest fears. Others were almost kind, offering encouragement or warning her of dangers. They spoke in fragments, sometimes overlapping, sometimes contradicting each other. They knew where they were, could sense what was happening around her. They talked about her more than they talked to her. This is psychosis as ninja theory. The developers of Hellblade came to understand it through their extensive research and collaboration with mental health professionals and people who actually experience such conditions. Not a simple binary of good voice and evil voice, but a complex, shifting landscape of perceptions that exist alongside ordinary reality, that comment on and interpret the world in ways that others cannot hear. To Senua, these voices were the Furies, evidence of her curse, proof that the darkness her father warned about was real and growing stronger with each passing year. She did not understand that her condition might be a form of illness rather than divine punishment. She had no framework for such understanding. She had only her father's theology and her own terror. And then something changed. Despite Zynbel's best efforts to keep his daughter isolated, Senua found moments of escape, brief windows when she could slip away from the homestead and explore the world beyond her father's shadow. On one such excursion, in a clearing beneath a great tree, she saw something that would alter the course of her entire life. A boy training with a sword. His name was Dillion, and he was the son of a chieftain from a nearby village. He moved through his practice with a grace that Senua had never seen, his blade cutting patterns through the air like a kind of dance. She watched from hiding, transfixed by this display of something that looked like freedom, like joy, like a person moving through the world without the weight of curses and gods pressing down upon them. There was something about the way he held himself, the casual confidence of someone who had never been told that his very existence was wrong. He laughed sometimes at his own mistakes, at the way a move didn't quite land the way he intended. Laughter. Senua could barely remember what that felt like. If she had ever known. She came back the next day, and the next, and the day after that. Hidden among the trees, she began to mimic his movements, teaching herself the steps of his dance without ever having held a sword in her life. The voices watched with her, some mocking, some curious, all of them commenting on this strange new obsession that had taken hold of their host. "She's going to get herself killed," one voice whispered, sneaking out like this. "Father will find out." But another voice, softer, almost gentle. "Look at how he moves. She can learn this. She can be like him." The practice became a kind of meditation. In the hours spent copying Dillion's sword forms, Senua found something she had rarely experienced, a respite from her own thoughts. The concentration required to mirror his movements left no room for the usual spiral of fear and self-hatred. For a little while each day, she was simply a student learning a craft, not a cursed girl trapped in her father's theology of suffering. And then one day, Dillion saw her. He could have been cruel. He could have mocked the strange girl from the isolated homestead, the one everyone whispered about, the daughter of the grim druid who kept her locked away because of the darkness that lived inside her. But Dillion was not cruel. He saw a young woman who moved with natural talent, who had taught herself swordsmanship simply by watching him practice. He saw someone different, yes, someone unusual, but he did not see a curse. He saw a person. That first conversation was awkward and halting, Senua barely able to meet his eyes, the voices chattering their anxieties into her ears. But Dillion was patient. He asked her about her training, about the moves she had learned. He offered to help her improve. He treated her, in short, like someone worth knowing. For Senua, who had spent her entire life being told that she was dangerous and broken and better kept away from others, this simple kindness was revolutionary. The friendship that developed between them was slow and careful. Senua was wary, always waiting for the moment when Dillion would see the truth of what she was and pull away in disgust. But that moment never came. As they trained together, as they talked and walked and spent time in each other's company, something impossible began to happen. Senua started to believe that maybe, just maybe, her father was wrong. Dillion did not fear her voices. When she finally trusted him enough to tell him about them, he listened without judgment. He acknowledged that he could not hear what she heard, could not see what she saw, but he did not treat her experiences as evidence of some fundamental corruption. Instead, he offered a different interpretation. The hardest battles, he told her, are fought in the mind. Her condition made her different, not evil, made her someone who perceived the world in ways others could not someone who deserved to be punished for existing. Under his influence, something that had been frozen inside Senua began to thaw. She practiced her swordsmanship until she was genuinely skilled, until the blade felt like an extension of her own body. She learned to move through the world with something approaching confidence. The voices did not diminish, but they no longer seemed quite so overwhelming when Dillion was beside her. Eventually, the relationship deepened beyond friendship. Love grew in the spaces between sword practice and long conversations, in the quiet moments when Senua allowed herself to imagine a future that did not end in darkness and fire. Dillion became her light, her anchor, the proof that the world could be something other than what her father had taught her. And when she finally found the courage to leave Zinbel's homestead and join Dillion in his village, it must have felt like a kind of resurrection. A woman who had spent her entire life being told she was cursed, finally choosing to live as though she deserved happiness. For a time, a beautiful and fragile time, Senua was almost happy. But darkness has a way of finding those who have known it, and the voices never stopped whispering that this peace could not last, that someone like her did not deserve this kind of light. They would turn out to be right. Part 2. Love and Temporary Light. Let us linger here for a moment in this small window of warmth before the cold returns. Let us sit with Senua in the village where she found refuge, in the arms of the man who loved her without condition, in the brief and precious years when the darkness seemed to recede just enough to let her breathe. There is a kind of cruelty in happiness that comes to those who have known mostly suffering. Every good moment carries within it the knowledge that it might end, the fear that it will be taken away, the suspicion that you do not deserve it, and that some cosmic force will eventually notice the mistake and correct it. Senua knew this feeling intimately. Even in her happiest moments with Dillion, part of her was waiting for the blow to fall. But she also learned, slowly and with great difficulty, to set that fear aside, to be present in the good moments instead of bracing for their end, to accept that perhaps, just perhaps, she was allowed to have this. The village where Dillion lived was not so different from the wider world of Pictish Scotland, a collection of thatched dwellings clustered around a central gathering space, surrounded by fields and forests and the ever-present sound of wind from the sea. But to Senua, it must have seemed like another realm entirely, a place where people moved about their daily lives without fear of the pit, without the shadow of a father who saw divine punishment in every moment of human suffering. Life with Dillion was simple in the way that only deeply precious things can be. They trained together, honing their skills with sword and shield until they could move as one in the practice ring. They walked the shores and the forests, exploring a world that Senua had barely known during her years of isolation. They talked sometimes for hours about everything and nothing, about the shape of clouds and the taste of salt air and the way the light changed color as the sun set over the western waters. The villagers were wary of her at first. Word had traveled, as it always does in small communities, about the druid's daughter and the darkness that supposedly lived inside her. Some avoided her gaze, others whispered when she passed. But Dillion's position as the chieftain's son offered her a degree of protection, and his open devotion to her gave others permission to set aside their suspicions. Slowly, carefully, Senua began to find a place among them. The voices did not go away. They never went away. They commented on every meal she ate, every conversation she had, every moment of quiet she tried to claim for herself. But their tone began to change, or perhaps Senua's relationship with them began to shift. Among the chorus of speakers who lived inside her head, some seemed almost supportive when she was with Dillion, urging her forward when doubt crept in, warning her of dangers real and imagined. Dillion, for his part, learned to recognize the signs when the voices grew louder, when Senua's attention drifted to conversations he could not hear. He did not try to pull her back by force or fear. Instead, he simply waited, offering his presence as an anchor, giving her space to navigate the inner world that he could never fully understand. How does he so effortlessly court the world in bliss? The voices sometimes asked, watching Dillion move through his days without the constant commentary that defined Senua's existence. And Senua had no answer except to marvel that such a person existed and that such a person had chosen her. They did not pretend that her condition was gone or cured or somehow resolved through the magic of love. The darkness was still there. The memories of her father's cruelty still surfaced in nightmares and moments of panic. The voices still whispered their doubts and fears, and occasionally cruel mockeries of her happiness. But all of it seemed more bearable when Dillion was near. Senua learned to be something other than afraid. In those years, she discovered that she possessed gifts beyond the ability to hear voices that others could not perceive. Her sensitivity to patterns, to the hidden connections between things, made her valuable in unexpected ways. She could see the signs of illness in water before others fell sick. She could read the weather in ways that seemed almost supernatural to those around her. She could sense when something was wrong, could feel the approach of danger in her bones before it arrived. The very abilities that had marked her as cursed in her father's household became assets in her new home. The village that had initially feared her began to value her, even if they did not fully understand what she was. And Dillion's love only deepened as he watched her grow into this new version of herself. He saw not the broken creature that Zinbel had tried to create, but a woman of remarkable strength and sensitivity, someone who had endured horrors that would have destroyed a lesser person and emerged still capable of kindness, still reaching toward the light. There were quiet evenings by the fire, Dillion's arm around her shoulders as the flames crackled and the voices murmured their endless commentary in the background of her mind. There were mornings waking beside him, the brief disorientation of finding herself somewhere safe, someone loved, still not quite believing that this life was real. They made promises to each other, as lovers do, vows that assumed a future stretching out before them, years and decades of this peace, growing old together in a world where the darkness could be managed and love could be enough. The voices sometimes laughed at these promises, but Senua was learning not to let their mockery determine her choices. And then the plague came. It started slowly, as plagues often do, a few people falling ill, their symptoms attributed to bad food or winter chill. But the sickness spread with terrible speed, cutting through the village like a scythe through wheat. People began to die, young and old, strong and weak. The disease showed no preference and offered no mercy. Dillion's father was among the victims. The chieftain who had welcomed Senua into his household, who had given her a place despite the whispers and the warnings, was consumed by the fever and gone within days. And in the chaos and grief that followed, the old suspicions resurfaced with renewed venom. The druid's daughter, the cursed one, she came among us, and then death followed. It was not logical, it was not fair. But logic and fairness have never stopped frightened people from seeking scapegoats for their suffering. The whispers that had faded during the good years now grew into open accusations. Senua had brought the plague. Her darkness had called down this punishment upon them all. Even Dillion, in his grief, said things he did not mean, lashed out at her in a moment of despair, his words cutting deeper than any blade, because they came from the one person who was supposed to see past the curse. The voices erupted into a frenzy. "We told you. We warned you. You don't deserve this happiness. The darkness will always find you." And Senua, who had spent years learning to believe she was worthy of love, felt that belief crumble like a castle built on sand. She could not stay. Every death in the village felt like her fault. Every grieving face seemed to turn toward her with accusation. The life she had built, the person she had become, everything seemed poisoned by the conviction that her father had been right all along. The darkness inside her touched everyone she loved. Staying would only bring more death, more suffering, more destruction. She went to Dillion on the night before she left, found him grieving his father, lost in his own darkness, barely able to look at her. And even though part of her understood that his cruelty came from pain rather than conviction, the words he had spoken lodged like splinters in her heart. She told him she was leaving, that she would go into the wilderness as a Gelt, one of those touched by curse or madness or battle trauma who seek penance through isolation. She would face the darkness alone, wrestle it into submission, and return only when she was certain she could no longer harm those around her. Dillion's grief gave way to desperation. He begged her to stay, swore he had not meant what he said, promised that they could face whatever came together, that his momentary weakness did not represent his true feelings, that she was not to blame for the plague or for anything else. But Senua had already retreated behind walls that no amount of pleading could penetrate. "Promise me," Dillion finally said. "Promise me you'll come back." She promised, and then she walked out into the cold night, into the wild lands beyond the village, into a year of isolation that would change everything. This was the end of the temporary light. The warmth that had sustained her through those precious years would soon become nothing but memory, fuel for a grief so vast it would drive her to the very gates of the underworld. But Senua did not know that yet. She knew only that she had to leave, had to face the darkness alone, had to protect the person she loved most from the curse she carried inside her. The voices went with her, of course. They always went with her, commenting on every step, every stumble, every moment of doubt and despair in the wilderness ahead. They had so much more to say before the end. Part 3. Loss, guilt, and breaking. The wilderness that Senua entered was not kind. The northern reaches of Orkney and the Scottish mainland were places of harsh beauty, of wind-scoured rocks and ancient forests and waters so cold they could stop a heart in minutes. This was not a landscape that welcomed pilgrims seeking redemption. This was a landscape that tested everything you thought you knew about survival. Senua wandered. The nights were the worst. When darkness fell and she could no longer move through the unfamiliar terrain, she would find whatever shelter presented itself, a hollow beneath a fallen tree, a space between rocks that blocked some fraction of the wind, and she would sit there, unable to sleep, listening to the voices argue about what she should do, where she should go, whether she should simply give up and let the wilderness claim her. Sometimes she wanted to give up. The thought came to her in the small hours when the cold had seeped into her bones and the darkness outside matched the darkness within. It would be easy. Just stop moving, stop eating. Let the exposure take her slowly, let the voices fade into a final silence. She would be with her mother then, wherever spirits go when their bodies fail. But Dillion's face would come to her in those moments, his smile, his promise that she would return, and she would find the strength to survive one more night. The concept of the Gelt, which Ninja Theory's developers discovered in their research into Celtic culture, describes a person driven from society by curse, grief, or the trauma of battle. Such individuals would take to the wilds, living in isolation as they sought penance or punishment, or simply an escape from a world that no longer had a place for them. Some were said to grow feathers like birds, becoming creatures of neither the human world nor any other. Some died alone in the forests. Some, the stories say, eventually found their way back. For Senua, the wilderness became a battleground, not against the elements, though those were brutal enough, but against herself, against the darkness that she had come to confront, against the voices that offered no respite from their constant commentary. She was struggling. That much is clear from the fragments of memory that surface throughout her later journey. The voices grew more insistent in isolation, without Dillion's steadying presence to anchor her, without the rhythms of village life to provide structure. She lost track of days, of weeks, of the turning of seasons. She spoke to no one except the presences inside her head, and they were not gentle conversationalists. It was in this state of dissolution that she found Druth, or perhaps Druth found her. The circumstances of their meeting are uncertain, filtered through the haze of Senua's unreliable perception. What we know is that he was a man marked by suffering as surely as she was, a former scholar from Ireland. His name before his transformation had been Finden. He had been captured by the Northmen, the Viking raiders who had begun to venture into these waters seeking plunder and slaves. For 6 years, Druth had been their captive. He had witnessed horrors that shattered his understanding of the world. He had been forced to participate in raids, to watch as villages were burned and people were slaughtered. The torture and trauma had broken something inside him, had gifted him with his own form of darkness that set him apart from ordinary people. But Druth had also learned. In his years among the Northmen, he had absorbed their stories, their legends, their understanding of the cosmos. He had heard the tales of Odin and Thor, of the 9 worlds, and the great tree Yggdrasil that connected them all, of Helheim, where the dead resided, and Hela, who ruled over them. He had become a repository of Norse mythology, a walking library of stories that blended with his own trauma into something profound and terrible. When the Northmen raided a settlement near Orkney and set it ablaze, Druth had seized his chance. He ran into the flames, let them consume his former self, and emerged on the other side scarred and damaged but free. His lungs were seared by smoke, his face bore the marks of burning, but he had escaped. And then he had wandered, just as Senua wandered, trying to warn others of the Northmen's coming, trying to find meaning in a world that had shown him only cruelty. No one believed him. They called him Druth, a word meaning fool or madman, and they turned away from his warnings. Only Senua, lost in her own darkness, recognized something kindred in his suffering. They spent time together in the wilderness. How long, we cannot say. But during that time, Druth shared his stories with her. He told her of the gods of the Northmen, of the heroes and monsters and cosmic forces that shaped their understanding of existence. He told her about Helheim, the realm of the dead, where the goddess Hela kept the souls of those who had passed from the world of the living. He told her about the trials a warrior must face to enter that realm, about the guardians who stood at its gates, about the legendary sword Grammar that was said to be capable of slaying even gods. These stories seeped into Senua's consciousness, blending with her Celtic understanding of death and the soul, creating a framework through which she would later interpret her own experiences. Druth's tales became the architecture of the underworld she would eventually build inside her own mind. But there was more to Druth than his stories, a darker secret that he carried like a wound that would not heal. If the player finds all 44 lore stones scattered throughout the game, each one containing a memory of Druth's stories, they eventually unlock a hidden scene that reveals the truth. Druth had not merely been a passive prisoner of the Northmen. In his years of captivity, he had been forced to serve them as a translator and guide. His knowledge of languages, his understanding of the lands they raided, made him valuable in ways that brought him complicity in their violence. Worse still, Druth had seen another figure among the Northmen, a dark-cloaked man from these very islands who had traded information about his own people in exchange for his safety, a man who had led the raiders to villages that might otherwise have escaped their notice. The implication is never stated outright, but the suggestion hangs in the air like smoke. This collaborator may have been Zinbel, Senua's father, the druid whose hatred of his own daughter might have extended to leading her enemies directly to the village where she had found happiness. We cannot know for certain. The game offers only shadows and inferences, leaving the truth buried beneath layers of trauma and unreliable memory. But the possibility adds another dimension to the horror that was to come. Eventually, Senua felt ready to return. A year had passed, more or less, a year of wrestling with her darkness, of absorbing Druth's stories, of trying to become someone who could exist in the world without bringing destruction to those around her. She had not conquered her condition, could not conquer it any more than she could conquer the color of her eyes or the shape of her bones. But she had come to some kind of accommodation with it. She had promised Dillion she would return, and so she turned her footsteps homeward, toward the village where love waited, where a future might still be possible. What she found broke her completely. The village was destroyed, buildings burned or collapsed, their timbers scattered like bones across the landscape. Bodies lay where they had fallen, left to rot by attackers who cared nothing for the dead. The smell of smoke and decay hung in the air, and the silence was absolute, broken only by the wind and the cries of carrion birds circling overhead, waiting for the living to leave so they could return to their feast. The Northmen had come. Senua moved through the ruins in a daze, the voices howling in her ears, her mind trying and failing to process what she was seeing. Here was the house where she and Dillion had lived. There was the tree where they had practiced together. The path where they had walked on summer evenings was now strewn with the bodies of people she had known, their faces frozen in expressions of terror and pain. She found the chieftain's hall collapsed in on itself, the great central pillar that had supported the roof now blackened and broken. Around it lay the bodies of warriors who had tried to defend their home, their weapons still clutched in hands that would never swing them again. Everyone she had known, everyone who had finally begun to accept her, everyone she had left behind in the hope of protecting them, dead. All of them dead. She searched through the ruins with growing desperation, her hands trembling, the voices growing louder with each body she turned over. Not him, not him, please. Gods she no longer believed in, not him. And then she found Dillion. They had made an example of him. The Northmen practiced a form of execution called the Blood Eagle, a ritualistic torture that involved carving the victim's back open and pulling out their lungs while they were still alive, spreading them like wings as an offering to their gods. The historical accuracy of this practice has been debated by scholars, but in Senua's world, in the nightmare landscape of her grief, it was horribly, undeniably real. The man she loved had been butchered. Something shattered inside Senua in that moment. Whatever progress she had made in the wilderness, whatever accommodation she had reached with her darkness, was swept away in a flood of grief so vast it drowned all rational thought. The voices screamed. Her vision warped and twisted. The world itself seemed to tear at its edges, revealing something darker underneath. She did not accept his death. She could not accept it. Not after everything she had suffered, everything she had sacrificed, everything she had lost. Dillion was not simply gone. His soul had been taken by the gods of the Northmen, imprisoned in their underworld, and she would get him back. According to Celtic belief, the soul resided in the head. So Senua did what grief and madness demanded. She took Dillion's head, severed it from his ruined body with her sword, wrapped it in cloth, and carried it with her as she walked away from the burning village. She would take him to Helheim. She would face whatever guardians stood in her way. She would bargain with the goddess Hela herself, offer her own soul if necessary, whatever it took to reclaim what had been stolen from her. This was not a rational plan. It was not supposed to be rational. It was the response of a mind pushed past its breaking point, reaching for any framework that promised a possibility other than acceptance. The stories Druth had told her became the map for an impossible journey. The Norse mythology that had seeped into her consciousness during their year together now shaped her perception of reality itself. As Senua walked toward the coast, toward the lands where the Northmen dwelled, toward the legendary entrance to the realm of the dead, the world around her began to transform. Was she traveling through actual physical space? Was she descending into some genuine supernatural realm, or was everything that followed a construction of her traumatized mind, a psychotic break so profound that it generated an entire underworld complete with gods and monsters and tests worthy of legend? The game refuses to answer this question definitively, and that refusal is the point. Senua's experience is Senua's experience, regardless of how it might map onto objective reality. What matters is not whether Helheim exists in some external sense, but that it exists for her, that every trial she faces is real in the only way that matters, because she is the one facing it. The journey into the underworld had begun. The voices went with her, as they always did, but now there was another presence among them. The darkness. Her father's voice internalized and given terrible weight, whispering that this quest was doomed, that she was cursed, that she would fail as she had always failed, as she was always meant to fail. In one hand, her sword on her belt wrapped in claw. Part 4. The journey into hell. Imagine the shore of a river that separates the world of the living from the world of the dead. Gray water stretches toward a horizon lost in fog. The sky is the color of bruises. Islands rise from the mist, their surfaces carved with impossible structures, wooden towers crowned with ravens, paths that seem to lead nowhere. The air here tastes different. Cold and clean and empty, like breathing the memory of air rather than air itself. There is no sun, no moon, no stars, just an unchanging gray light that comes from everywhere and nowhere, that casts no shadows and offers no warmth. This is where Senua begins her descent. This is the threshold of Helheim as her mind has constructed it. She arrives by boat, paddling through the still waters while the voices whisper their encouragement and their doubts. Some urge her forward, others beg her to turn back. Still others simply describe what she is doing in endless loops of commentary. The boat is small and weathered, its wood gray with age and exposure. It moves through the water without making a sound, as if the river itself is holding its breath, waiting to see what this mortal woman will do, how far she will go, whether she has the strength to survive what lies ahead. She is determined. She is afraid. She will not stop until she reaches Hela. The world that unfolds before Senua is unlike anything she has ever seen, and yet strangely familiar. Every nightmare she has ever had seems to have contributed some fragment to this landscape. Every story Druth told her has left its mark. The architecture blends Norse and Celtic motifs, wooden carvings depicting gods and beasts, stone ruins covered in runes that pulse with meaning she can almost grasp. The effect is dreamlike, or perhaps nightmare-like, a place where the rules of ordinary reality have been suspended. Distances are uncertain. A path that seems short proves impossibly long, while a destination that appears far away is reached in moments. The landscape itself seems to shift when Senua is not looking directly at it, as if her attention is the only thing holding it in place. The Northmen are here too, or at least their ghosts. Warriors in armor that gleams with unnatural light, their faces hidden behind masks of bone and metal. They appear without warning, emerging from shadows and mist, to block her path with axes and swords. She fights them with the skills Dillion taught her, with the techniques she learned watching him practice beneath that tree so long ago. Combat in this realm is desperate and intimate. Senua faces her enemies one at a time, reading their movements, parrying their strikes, waiting for the opening that will let her blade find flesh. The voices help sometimes, calling out warnings when attackers approach from behind, screaming when she is in danger, cheering when she lands a killing blow. But these are not ordinary Northmen. They are manifestations, representations of the invaders who destroyed everything she loved. Each one she kills is revenge for the village, for Dillion, for the life that was stolen from her. Each one she kills means nothing, because they just keep coming, because her enemies are already dead, because she cannot actually hurt the people who hurt her. She fights anyway. What else is there to do? The path to Hela is not direct. Before she can reach the goddess of the dead, she must prove herself worthy of entering her realm. Two guardians stand at the gates of Helheim, and each must be defeated before Senua can continue. The first is Surtur. In Norse mythology, Surtur is a fire giant, one of the primordial forces destined to play a role in Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods. He carries a flaming sword and rules over Muspelheim, the realm of fire. At the end of all things, he will lead his forces against the gods themselves and set the world ablaze. In Senua's underworld, Surtur is all of this and more. He is the lord of flame, the embodiment of destruction, the personification of the fire that consumed her mother while she watched helplessly. His realm is a nightmare of burning forests and rivers of molten rock, of screams and smoke and the endless crackling of flames. To reach Surtur, Senua must navigate a series of challenges that require her to manipulate the environment through portals of perception. By looking through certain openings or focusing her attention in specific ways, she can change what is real, can transform blocked paths into open ones, can see the truth hidden beneath illusions of fire and ruin. This is her gift turned inward, the ability to perceive patterns that others cannot see, the sensitivity that her father called a curse and that Dillion recognized as simply a different way of experiencing the world. In the underworld, this gift becomes literal. The runes that block her path can only be found by aligning fragments of the environment in ways that require her unique perception. The battle with Surtur is fought in a landscape of flame. The giant towers over her, wreathed in fire, his burning blade sweeping through the air with enough force to incinerate anything it touches. Senua dances around his attacks, darting in to strike at his legs, retreating before the flames can consume her. The voices scream their encouragement and their terror, unable to agree whether she can win this fight or is simply prolonging her own destruction. But she does win through skill and determination and the sheer refusal to accept defeat. She brings the fire giant down, and as he falls, she claims his power, earns the mark that will allow her to proceed toward the gates of Helheim. The second guardian is Valravn. Here is an interesting detail about the mythology ninja theory wove into their game. Valravn is not actually from Norse mythology at all. The creature comes from Danish folklore, where Valravne are supernatural ravens who have consumed the corpses of the dead, particularly kings who fell in battle and gained human intelligence and, sometimes, the ability to take human form. In Senua's underworld, Valravn has become something else entirely. He is a god of illusions, a half-raven, half-human figure whose realm is a maze of shifting perspectives and impossible geometries. Nothing is as it appears in his domain. Doors lead to rooms that should not exist. Stairs climb to nowhere. The very concept of direction becomes meaningless. This is a different kind of challenge than Surtur's realm of fire, where the giant tested Senua's courage and combat prowess. The raven god tests her grip on reality itself. She must find her way through a landscape designed to disorient and deceive, using her unique perception to identify the truth hidden within the illusions. The voices are particularly active here, their commentary blending with the environmental confusion until Senua can barely distinguish between her thoughts and their pronouncements. Some of them seem to enjoy the chaos, reveling in a world as unstable as the one they inhabit inside her head. Others are afraid, sensing that this place was built by something that understands their kind of madness and has weaponized it. Valravn himself is fast and deadly, a whirlwind of feathers and blades who teleports around the battlefield, appearing behind Senua without warning, vanishing before she can land a killing blow. Fighting him requires patience and precision, the ability to read his patterns even when those patterns seem designed to be unreadable. When he falls, Senua claims her second mark. The path to Helheim is now open. She crosses a bridge of stone and bone, the fog parting before her to reveal the dark towers of the underworld. The voices grow quiet as she approaches, their constant chatter fading to whispers, as if even they are intimidated by what lies ahead. And then Hela appears. The goddess of the dead is not what Senua expected. Half of her face and body are beautiful, perfect, untouched by decay. The other half is burned, ruined, a mirror of what happened to Galena in the flames. She is covered in runes like the ones that decorated the pit where Senua was imprisoned. She is enormous, towering over the young warrior who has come to bargain for a soul. The confrontation is brief and devastating. Senua charges at the goddess with grammar. No, wait, she does not have grammar yet. Her ordinary sword, the blade she has carried since leaving the village, shatters against Hela's defenses. The goddess strikes her down with a single blow, leaving her wounded and broken on the bridge as her enemy retreats into the darkness beyond. The voices erupt. You failed. You were never going to succeed. This quest was always hopeless. But Senua does not die. She cannot die. Not yet. Not before she has reclaimed what was taken from her, bleeding from a wound to her head that adds its own distortions to her already fractured perception. She crawls off the bridge and into the realm beyond. She will need a different weapon to challenge Hela, a blade capable of killing. Part 5, The Trials. Beyond the bridge where Hela struck her down, Senua finds herself in a different kind of landscape. A great tree rises from an island of rock, its branches reaching toward a sky that seems to hold no stars. This is her mind's interpretation of Yggdrasil, the world tree of Norse mythology, the axis around which all realms rotate. Embedded in the trunk of the tree is a sword, not her shattered blade, but something ancient and powerful. This is grammar, the legendary weapon forged by Odin, claimed by the hero Sigmund, capable of cutting through divine flesh as easily as mortal. But when Senua reaches for the sword, her hand closes on nothing. The weapon is there, she can see it, but she cannot yet claim it. The blade is broken, shattered into pieces, and before she can wield it, she must reforge it through trials that will test everything she is. 4 shards mark the 4 trials she must complete, each one connected to an aspect of her past, each one forcing her to confront memories she has long tried to suppress. The voices grow louder as she approaches the first shard, their commentary shifting from moment to moment as old traumas surface like bodies rising from deep water. The blindness trial plunges Senua into darkness, not the metaphorical darkness she has carried all her life, but actual physical blindness. The world goes black around her, and she must navigate through it, using only sound, only the guidance of the voices that have always accompanied her. Somewhere in this darkness, something hunts her, a creature that moves through the shadows, that can only be detected by the noise it makes, that will kill her instantly if she strays too far from the light. This is the darkness that Garm embodies. In Norse mythology, Garm is a hound who guards the gates of Helheim, but in Senua's underworld, he has become something else, a massive, rotting, boar-like creature who stalks her through the lightless corridors of her own fears. When she finally corners the beast, she must fight it in bursts of illumination, striking when she can see and retreating when the darkness returns. The fear of the dark, the fear of what waits in the pit, the fear of being alone with nothing but the voices and the knowledge that something terrible is coming. This trial is all of those fears made manifest, and Senua must walk through them with nothing but her courage and her desperation to light the way. The labyrinth trial is a maze of corridors that loop back on themselves, of identical passages that seem to lead everywhere and nowhere, lost. She is lost as she was lost in the wilderness after leaving Dillion, as she is lost now in a quest that may have no meaningful destination. The voices offer conflicting guidance, some urging her left, others insisting she go right. their disagreement reflecting her own uncertainty about which way leads forward and which way leads only to more confusion. But there is a thread through this maze. If she listens carefully, Dillion's voice or the memory of his voice calling to her from somewhere beyond the walls. By following that sound, by trusting in something outside the chaos of her own mind, she can find her way through. The love that seemed lost can still guide her, even here, even in the depths of the underworld. The swamp trial takes her to a place of rot and decay, where the ground itself seems to want to swallow her. Disease, corruption, the plague that swept through Dillion's village, the sickness that everyone blamed her for, the evidence that everything she touches eventually rots. The swamp is filled with the shambling dead, with bodies that rise from the muck to grasp at her ankles, with the stench of decomposition that seems to seep into her very bones. This is the self-hatred she has carried since childhood, the conviction that she is fundamentally contaminated, that her mere presence poisons everything around her. To complete this trial, she must wade through the physical manifestation of that belief, must keep moving even when every step feels like it's dragging her down into the filth that her father always told her she deserved. The tower trial shows her a structure that exists in 2 times at once. Through a mask of ritual, Senua can shift between the present and the past, between the ruins that stand now and the building as it once was. By moving between these states, she can navigate to the top of the tower, can reach the light that glows there like a beacon. But the light is Dillion, or the memory of Dillion, or the hope that Dillion might somehow still exist, somewhere, in some form that she can reach. Each shift between present and past forces her to confront the difference between what was and what is, between the happiness she once had and the ruin that remains. The trials are not just physical challenges, they are emotional excavations, forcing Senua to dig through the accumulated sediment of her trauma and her grief, to face the memories she has tried to bury, to acknowledge the pain she has carried without ever truly examining. And beneath all of them, beneath the darkness and the maze and the rot and the tower, lies the truth she has been avoiding since she was 5 years old. Her father killed her mother. The memory surfaces finally, breaking through the false narrative that has protected Senua from the full horror of her childhood. She sees it clearly now. Galena tied to the stake, Zinbel intoning prayers, the flames rising as a child screams and screams, and no one does anything to stop it. Her mother did not kill herself to escape the darkness. Her mother was murdered by a man who claimed to love her, who claimed to be protecting her, who claimed that his cruelty was the will of the gods, and the darkness that has haunted Senua all her life. The voice that speaks with contempt and hatred and endless accusation. That darkness wears her father's face. The realization breaks something open inside her. All these years she has fought against herself, has believed that there was something fundamentally wrong with her nature, has accepted her father's theology as truth, but the enemy was never the voices in her head. The enemy was the man who taught her to fear them. With this understanding, she returns to the tree. The trials are complete. The sword grammar reforms before her eyes, whole and gleaming, ready for the hand of someone willing. Part 6. The Sea of Corpses and the Final Descent. Grammar is in her hand, but the sword comes with a price. The moment she claims the legendary weapon, the ground beneath her feet gives way, and Senua finds herself somewhere else entirely. This is the Sea of Corpses, a vast expanse of dark water stretching toward horizons lost in fog, the surface broken only by the bodies of the dead. She walks among them, wades through water that never seems to get deeper than her waist, stepping over and around the floating forms of the slain. Some of them wear the clothing of her village. Some of them have the faces of people she knew. Some of them might be Dillion, but she cannot look too closely, cannot bear to see what the Northmen made of him. The voices are subdued here, as if the weight of all this death has finally given them pause. But the darkness speaks clearly, her father's voice echoing across the water. You think you can save him? You think you can undo what was done? You are a fool, Senua. You have always been a fool. She keeps walking. The memories come faster now, layered atop each other like waves breaking against a shore. Her mother burning, her father locking her in the pit. Dillion's smile when he first spoke to her beneath the tree. The plague sweeping through the village. The ruins, the blood eagle, the head wrapped in cloth that she has carried all this way. Why are you doing this, Senua? What do you hope to achieve? She keeps walking, because the alternative is to stop. The alternative is to accept that Dillion is gone, truly gone, that no amount of grief or determination or sacrifice will bring him back, and she cannot accept that. Not yet, not until she has tried everything. Not until she has walked into the heart of the underworld and demanded an audience with death herself. Garm appears again, risen from the waters of the sea, his rotting form even more terrible in this context of endless death. The beast that stalks her through darkness, the embodiment of everything she fears about the pit, about isolation, about being trapped in her own mind with no way out. She fights him with grammar in her hand. She finally has a weapon that can harm him, that can cut through his decaying flesh and silence his terrible roaring. The battle is brutal, fought in shallow water stained red with blood that might be his or might be hers, surrounded by the floating dead who seem to lean in to watch. When Garm falls, the path forward opens. The gates of Hela's sanctum lie ahead. Before she enters, if she has found all the lore stones, she experiences one final memory of Druth. The old man removes his mask, reveals the symbol of Valravan marked on his forehead, and confesses the depth of his own guilt. He was not merely a captive of the Northmen, he was complicit in their conquests, forced to translate and guide and assist in the very raids that destroyed everything Senua loved. The revelation adds layers of meaning to everything Druth told her. His stories were not neutral histories, but the mythology of people who made him an instrument of their violence. His darkness was not the same as hers, but was born from different horrors, different guilts, different compromises with evil. Perhaps Senua understands. Perhaps she recognizes that everyone carries their own darkness, their own failures, their own memories of things they wish they could undo. Perhaps she simply files this knowledge away with everything else, one more piece of pain in a journey already overflowing with it. She enters the sanctum, and there at last is Hela. The goddess of the dead waits for her on a platform surrounded by the abyss. Half beautiful, half burned, her face a mirror of Galena's death, her body marked with the runes of Senua's prison. She does not attack immediately. Instead, she speaks no. The darkness speaks through her. Or perhaps she speaks through the darkness. The distinction no longer meaningful in this place where inside and outside have lost all meaning. The confrontation is not about combat, not at first. It is about truth. You know why you're really here, Senua. You know what this is really about. The voices clash around her, some urging her to fight, others begging her to listen, still others simply repeating fragments of everything that has come before. The cacophony rises until it threatens to drown out thought itself, and then Hela summons her army. They come from everywhere. The Northmen she has been fighting since she first set foot in this underworld. They rise from the ground, step from shadows, materialize from thin air. Dozens of them, hundreds, an endless tide of enemies that keeps coming no matter how many she cuts down. Senua fights. That is what she does. That is what she has always done. Parry and strike, dodge and counter, feel the impact of grammar biting into flesh that may or may not be real. The voices scream their warnings, alert her to attacks from behind, celebrate her kills, mourn her wounds, but they keep coming. No matter how many fall, more take their place. The battle goes on and on and on. And Senua feels her strength beginning to fade, feels the accumulated damage of every blow she has taken. finally catching up with her. The voices change their tune. Stop, Senua. You can stop, let go. You can let go. It's okay. It's okay to stop fighting. She has never heard them say anything like this before. Through all the trials, all the battles, all the moments when death seemed certain, they have always urged her forward, have always insisted that she keep going. But now, finally, in this moment of impossible odds, they offer a different path. Acceptance. Senua stops fighting. She lets the enemies overwhelm her, lets herself fall to her knees as they press in from all sides. Hela approaches Grammar, somehow in her hand now instead of Senua's. The sword that was supposed to kill gods now pointed at the woman who claimed it. In her final moments, Senua hears Dillion's voice, not as she has imagined it in her desperate hallucinations, but as it actually was, warm and real, and full of the acceptance he always offered her. The hardest battles are fought in the mind, he told her once, but sometimes the hardest thing is not to fight at all. Hela strikes. Part 7. Hela and letting go. The blade enters Senua's chest. She feels it, or she imagines she feels it. The cold metal sliding through flesh and bone, the pain that is also somehow a relief after so much struggle. The world goes white at the edges. The voices fall silent, truly silent, for the first time in her entire memory. There is a moment of perfect stillness. All the noise, all the chaos, all the constant chatter that has filled her head since childhood simply stops, and in that silence, Senua experiences something she has never experienced before: peace, the absence of everything that has tormented her. The quiet that her father promised his rituals would bring, but never did. Is this death? Is this what it feels like to finally let go? Hela reaches down and takes the bundle from Senua's belt. Dillion's head, the seat of his soul, the reason for this entire impossible journey. The object that has come to represent everything Senua has lost, everything she has fought for, everything she cannot accept, and she throws it over the edge of the platform into the abyss below. Senua watches it fall, watches the last physical trace of Dillion disappear into a darkness so deep it seems to have no bottom, watches everything she thought she was fighting for vanish without ceremony or meaning. Gone, truly gone, beyond any possibility of recovery, any hope of redemption, any dream of bringing him back. The object around which Senua's entire quest has been organized, vanishing into the darkness without ceremony or meaning, and something breaks inside her, but this time it is not a bad breaking. This time it is the breaking of chains, the shattering of a prison she built for herself out of grief and guilt and the desperate refusal to accept what could not be changed. The camera pulls back, and we see that Senua is the one standing now. Hela lies dead at her feet, the burned and ruined half of the goddess facing upward, the beautiful half pressed against the stone. The sword, Grammar, is nowhere to be seen. The endless army has vanished. Senua looks at her hands. She looks at the body that was just a moment ago about to kill her, that is now somehow her enemy defeated. What has happened here? What did she actually do? The answers, as always with this game, are multiple and uncertain. Perhaps Hela was always a part of Senua, the portion of her psyche that clung to Dillion so tightly it could not accept his death. By dying, by surrendering, by letting go of her impossible quest, Senua killed that part of herself and emerged transformed. Perhaps the goddess of the dead was real in some supernatural sense, and Senua genuinely challenged her in combat, and won through means that operate according to rules beyond mortal understanding. Perhaps nothing that happened after Senua found Dillion's body was real in any conventional sense, and this entire journey was a mental process of grief and acceptance played out in symbolic form, with the ending representing some kind of psychological breakthrough. The game does not tell us which interpretation is correct. The game suggests that the question itself may be wrong, that the distinction between real and imagined, between internal and external, is not as meaningful as we might assume. What matters is that Senua has changed. She stands for a moment at the edge of the platform, looking down into the darkness where Dillion's head disappeared. The voices begin to return, slowly, tentatively, like creatures emerging from shelter after a storm. But something is different. She can hear it in their tone, can feel it in the quality of their presence. Wait, one of them says, it's different. They are still there, the Furies, the constant companions who have commented on every moment of her existence for as long as she can remember. They have not been cured. They have not been driven out. Senua has not been fixed in the sense that her father always demanded she be fixed, has not been cleansed of the darkness that was never actually darkness at all. But she has stopped fighting them for her entire life. Senua has treated the voices as enemies to be defeated, as symptoms of a curse to be lifted, as evidence of her fundamental brokenness. She has tried to suppress them, to ignore them, to drown them out with activity and distraction, and the steady pressure of a world that told her she was wrong to hear what she heard. Now, standing at the end of her impossible journey, she accepts them as part of who she is, not a curse, not a blessing, just a part, one aspect of a complex and difficult existence, no more and no less significant than any other aspect of being Senua, daughter of Galena, lover of Dillion, warrior of the Pictish people, survivor of horrors that would have destroyed anyone else. The acceptance does not fix everything. It does not bring Dillion back. It does not undo the murder of her mother or the years of abuse she suffered at her father's hands. It does not resolve the trauma or heal the wounds or make the memories any less painful, but it changes her relationship to all of these things. It allows her to carry them without being crushed beneath their weight. It offers a foundation on which some future self might be built, one layer at a time, day by difficult day. Senua turns away from the edge of the platform. She walks toward the exit, toward whatever lies beyond this place that is or is not Helheim, toward a future that is unwritten and uncertain and entirely her own. And then she looks at the camera. She looks at us. "Follow me," she says. "We have another story to tell." The narrator's voice, the one presence among the Furies who seemed aware of the player's existence from the beginning, speaks one last time. She tells us that she cannot follow where Senua is going next, that her time as guide has ended, but that we can continue to accompany this woman who has walked through the underworld and emerged not triumphant, exactly, but alive, different, changed. The screen fades to black. The voices for a moment fall silent, and somewhere in the darkness between endings and beginnings, Senua takes her first step into whatever comes next. Epilogue, the silence after. There is a particular quality to the silence at the end of Hellblade, Senua's sacrifice. It is not the absence of sound, not exactly, because the wind still blows and the waves still break somewhere in the distance, but it is the absence of the voices, or at least their transformation into something less insistent, less overwhelming, less like a prison, and more like companionship. For those of us listening, watching, following Senua through her journey, this silence feels earned. It feels like the breath after a long dive underwater, the moment when you surface and the world rushes back in. It feels like rest after labor, calm after storm, the quiet that comes when a battle has finally ended. Senua has not been cured. This is perhaps the most important thing to understand about her journey and its conclusion. The developers at Ninja Theory worked extensively with mental health professionals and people who actually experience psychosis to create an authentic portrayal of these conditions. And one of the insights that shaped their approach was the understanding that such experiences are not typically something that can be eliminated entirely. The stigma around mental illness often stems from a misunderstanding about what recovery means. People expect cure. They expect a clear before and after, a moment when the illness disappears and the person becomes normal. But for many conditions, including psychosis, recovery looks different. It looks like management rather than elimination. It looks like learning to live with something rather than being freed from it. This is what Senua achieves at the end of her journey. Not freedom from her voices, but a different relationship with them. Not the silence her father demanded, but a quieter kind of noise, one she can coexist with. The voices that Senua hears are not evil spirits that can be exorcised through sufficient prayer or determination. They are not demons that can be killed with a legendary sword. They are aspects of her neurology, possibly exacerbated by trauma, but fundamentally part of how her brain processes the world. She will hear them for the rest of her life. What changes at the end of the game is not the voices themselves, but Senua's relationship to them. She stops treating them as enemies. She stops believing that their existence proves she is cursed, broken, fundamentally wrong. She begins to accept them as part of her experience, neither good nor bad in themselves, simply present. This acceptance is the sacrifice referenced in the game's title, not the sacrifice of her life to Hela, though that moment of surrender is crucial, not the sacrifice of Dillion's head, though letting go of that object represents letting go of her desperate hope of resurrection. The sacrifice is giving up the belief that she could ever be normal in the sense her father demanded, could ever be cured of who she fundamentally is. In its place, she gains something else. Not peace exactly, because peace suggests an absence of struggle, and Senua will continue to struggle. But perhaps equilibrium, a foundation, a starting point from which to build a life that includes her condition rather than being defined by it. The game ends with an invitation to follow Senua into future stories, and indeed a sequel, Senua's Saga, Hellblade 2, was released in 2024. But that invitation also functions on a symbolic level, suggesting that her journey of recovery is ongoing, that the resolution of one crisis does not mean the end of all challenges, that healing is a process rather than a destination. For those of us who have never experienced psychosis, who hear only the voices we expect to hear, who see only the world that consensus reality presents to us, Hellblade offers something rare in gaming, a window into a fundamentally different way of being human. Not a window that allows us to fully understand, because full understanding may be impossible, but a window that at least shows us the outlines of an experience we might otherwise never consider. The voices that accompany Senua throughout her journey are technically impressive, created through binaural recording techniques that place different speakers at different positions around the listener's head, creating the sense of being surrounded by a crowd of constantly commenting presences. But they are also emotionally effective, evoking the exhaustion of never having silence, of being subjected to constant commentary that ranges from helpful to hostile, of never being alone in your own head. The game does not romanticize mental illness. It shows the suffering, the isolation, the damage that can result when people who experience these conditions are mistreated by those around them. Senua's father is a monster, and his monstrousness lies not in his beliefs about gods and curses, but in his willingness to torture and murder members of his own family in pursuit of a purity they could never achieve. But the game also does not reduce Senua to her condition. She is a warrior, skilled and determined. She is a lover, capable of deep and genuine connection. She is a survivor, enduring horrors that would break anyone and emerging still capable of moving forward. Her psychosis shapes her experience, but it does not define the entirety of who she is. There is a message here about the nature of mental illness and the nature of recovery. The message is not that these conditions can be overcome through willpower or adventure, not that a sufficiently heroic journey will cure what medication and therapy cannot address. The message is more subtle and perhaps more honest, that healing is possible even when cure is not, that acceptance can replace futile struggle, that a life worth living can be built even from broken materials. Senua walks away from Helheim at the end of her story, not into a bright future guaranteed to be painless, but into an unknown that contains both danger and possibility. The voices walk with her as they have always walked with her, as they will always walk with her, but their tone has changed, and her relationship to them has changed, and that change makes all the difference. For those who are struggling with their own darkness, whatever form it takes, this might be the most hopeful message a game could offer. Not that the darkness will disappear, but that you can learn to walk with it. Not that the voices will stop, but that they can become something other than enemies. Not that you will be cured, but that you can be whole in a different way. A way that includes what you have always tried to exclude, and for the first time in her life, standing at the threshold between one story and another, Senua hears something in the silence that might almost be peace. Thank you for walking with me through this gentle exploration of grief and isolation and the long journey toward acceptance. Hellblade, Senua's sacrifice, offers us a rare gift. The opportunity to spend time inside an experience we might never otherwise understand, to see the world through eyes that perceive it differently, to feel even a fraction of what it means to carry voices that never stop speaking. If this exploration moved you, if you found something valuable in this quiet hour spent in Senua's company, I would be grateful if you would like this video and subscribe to Sleepy Game Lore. There are more stories to tell, more worlds to visit, more journeys to take through the landscapes of games that offer us something more than entertainment. Until next time, rest well, dream deep, and remember that even in the darkest places, the way forward exists. You just have to be willing to let go of what you thought you were fighting for. Sweet dreams, everyone.